Hej och välkomna till Udda Ting, en podcast om sällsamma historier, kreativitet och kreatörerna själva. Jag heter Henrik Möller, musiken är komponerad av Testbild och den fina loggan till podden är skapad av Malmökonstnären Nalle Chinsky. Så, nu har mina pengar från patreon.com kommit in och som jag lovat ska jag tacka alla som har skänkt $10 eller mer. Och jag vill tacka följande: Micke Lundgren, Emma Risby, Johan Brigander, André Holm, Greg Johansson, Martin Nilsson, Hans Rydström och Björn Nyblad. Och slutligen så vill jag tacka filmaren Simo Paulakoski som har varit den absolut största sponsraren av det här projektet. Och tack till alla andra som har skänkt pengar också såklart. Tack så mycket. Det här avsnittet ska handla om Joe Pulver. Joe Pulver är författare till romanerna Nightmare's Disciple och The Orphan Palace. Men mest är han kanske känd som förläggare till samlingar som Grim Scribes Puppets, en hyllning till Thomas Ligotti, och A Season in Carcosa som bygger vidare på Robert Chambers The King in Yellow-historier. Joe är också kanske världens främsta King in Yellow-expert. The King in Yellow är skriven sent 1800-tal av författaren Robert Chambers och var en stor influens för H.P. Lovecraft. Boken fick ett rejält uppsving med TV-serien True Detective säsong 1 som innehåller massvis av referenser från The King in Yellow, som vi ska tala med Joe om snart. Men först vill jag ta tillfället i akt och tala lite om en författare som Joe introducerade mig för ett par år sedan, Jack OConnell. Jag tänkte först ha ett helt avsnitt dedikerat bara till Jack OConnell, men inleder istället här och nu direkt med Joe som får berätta.
My first encounter with Jack was Skin Palace, the language, right from page one. I thought, not only is this becoming a very interesting story, but here's a writer who truly loves, I mean, all writers love language, but Jack really loves it. It's something that I think has gotten in him in some ways deeper than some other writers. I like his ideas. I like his influences. When you're reading Jack, you can see Borges in there. You can feel Beckett in there. And I love weird fiction, of course, and horror and fantasy. But I also love crime. And here we are in the world of Jack OConnell. It's a dark, surreal. There are elements of the weird. You know, it's like with Jack, it's like, imagine a room. We walk into the room and there's perfume in the air. There's no woman there. Just a whiff of her perfume. She's been there recently. And I love that weird element in Jack's work that's like that perfume. It's not up front, it's not necessarily obvious, but it's present and it's inspirational. You start dreaming, you start imagining. So we have a storyline here, and above it and below it and behind it, we have this mist of possibility. And that's one of the things I utterly adore about him. I followed that up with The Skin Palace with Word Made Flesh. I don't know if you've read that yet.
Oh, that was the first one I read.
Skin Palace was just a brilliant place to start. It took my socks off. But Word Made Flesh, it's like, oh my word. You know, I mean, you read something that's an A-level piece of work that really blows you away. And then the next thing you pick up by the writer blows that away. You know, I mean, I went back, I read Box 9, which I love Wireless, and I really adore The Resurrectionist.
Sen så berättar Joe någonting fascinerande, en historia om Jack OConnell.
On the internet was a site called Fantastic Metropolis. It was something like Weird Fiction Review. But this is years and years and years ago. And one of the pieces of fiction on there was a very brief Jack OConnell piece, which was a fictional biography of James Loftus. Now, in this fictional biography, James Loftus was a great, unknown, forgotten noir writer. Heavy part David Goodis, certainly somebody whose work had weird fiction in it. And so we have this little brief biographical sketch about James Loftus. And then we have these short thumbnail description / reviews of Loftus's novels. And of course, even though this is such a short piece and it's just almost straight criticism, by the time you get to the end of this, you want to read these 8 books in the worst way. It's like, I want to read that book. I want to read that book. I want to read. I have stole mountains from this short little, I think it's like 4 pages, because I retyped the whole thing and then printed it and saved it, which is good because the site disappeared quite a number of years ago. And this particular piece of fiction has never appeared anywhere since. I have one story. In part, the story is based by one slight element in one of these Loftus books. And of course, in the fictional thumbnail of the writer, we're told that Loftus disappeared mysteriously. And if you comb the internet and you comb booksellers, you're never going to find any books by this guy. Even though some of them were, paperback novels by like Avon and stuff, which might be pricey, you should still be able to find a reference. And it's like, you're going to comb through everything in the universe, and whether money is no object or not, you're still never going to find anything. So this guy is a great mystery, and I just adore the idea of Loftus. OConnell on just so many levels. They're great stories, they're interesting ideas, and just one of my favorite writers. Unfortunately, he's had writer's block for years now, so we haven't seen anything, because I invited him to a couple of projects in the last couple of years, and he said, unfortunately, no. I'd do anything to get him writing again. Devil can show up, I'll sign, Want a couple of fingers? Here, take a finger if it would let Jack O'Connell write again.
Joe började sin bana som författare på ett väldigt speciellt sätt. Nästan löjligt absurt, men för mig fascinerande. Han berättar själv.
I never thought I had any talent. I was a reader. It was winter, and I was staring out my back door, out over the patio, over the yard, and it was covered in snowdrifts. Looked like Sweden. Upstate New York, in the middle of winter, we get snow. And just got first computer. Didn't know how to use the word processor, had never typed anything in my whole life. Nothing. And it's like, well, maybe I gotta type a letter someday. So I just started playing with the keyboard. A, B, 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 C, C, C. And I got bored doing that, so I typed in cat and dog and hat and, my name, and got bored doing that. And one day, I just typed 1 page of a story, which turned into Nightmare's Deciple, my first novel, which is a Lovecraftian crime novel. I printed it, just make sure I knew how to use the printer. And a buddy of mine came over that night, and we were having a beer, and I went to get another beer for us. And when I came back, he's like, "Hey, what is this?" Well, "Oh, it's my new computer." No, this. He was pointing at the piece of paper that I had printed which he had read. And he ultimately said to me, "This is almost readable." He was a real literary snob, so coming from him, that was quite the compliment. And he asked me, what am I doing with it? And I said, nothing, I was just goofing around. Well, he ultimately went home, and the next day I looked at the page and I thought, I wonder what's on page 2. And it was a long winter. We got a mountain of snow, so I just sat there typing away. When I got a chapter done, it's like, oh, okay, what the hell do you do now? Because I had never written a word. And I thought, okay, well, you read a lot of books, so how does this new chapter start? And bingo. And I just kept going, and, there was my first novel, which I showed to Bob Price, and he loved, and, it got published. Sometimes some people play solitaire well, I was typing a novel for the hell of it, as a private amusement. And of course, then it came out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I got to write something else now.
Tell me about your second novel, The Orphan Palace.
In the Loftus thing I was telling you about, he has a hotel in there. In another one of the thumbnails of one of the books, he mentions Kafka. And I thought, I want to write a story about a chain of hotels, and I want them all to look the same, like hotels in America look. If you stay in a Motel 6, they all look the same, except for when you go in, I want little weird changes, just variations. And I want the same desk clerk in every hotel, and I want her to be named Kafka. And I don't know why, but so I had that, and it's like I was rereading The Skin Palace. I had just reread it. I had put it away, and a few days later, I drove by a brick building, 3-story brick building, which made me think about an orphanage that I had to stay in for almost a month when I was a little kid. My mother was very ill and had to have an operation, and there was no relatives, so I was put into an orphanage because there was nowhere else to put me for a few weeks. And it was utter hell. Not that it was a bad place and I wasn't abused, but I was like 8 years old and it was scary and I didn't know anybody. And I'm not saying that the staff of the place was bad, but I wouldn't call them friendly either. They had a job to do. So I was thinking about this chain of hotels, and at the same time I was thinking about orphanages. Somehow I decided, and I thought, well, I already wrote a serial killer novel, Nightmare's Disciple. I need to write something different. And I thought, oh, this would be a novel about being on the road, and that way we can stop in all these hotels, and maybe we're an orphan. And once we were an orphan, we had baggage, of course, psychological baggage. And I decided, well, we're on the road, we're traveling, where are we traveling? Let's go back to where we acquired this baggage, which is the orphanage. And of course, I'm me, so that wasn't going to end well. So he became a serial killer. Format-wise, I wanted to do something different. So it almost reads like a long prose, like a 400-page prose poem instead of a novel. You certainly have regular-sized paragraphs here and there, but you have a lot of places in the Orphan Palace where it's 8 one-word paragraphs in a row, where I can manipulate you psychologically as a reader. You string 8 one-word paragraphs together, all of a sudden you're reading a lot faster. So if I want you to move, if I want you going faster, my character's running. Well, I can make you run visually by how fast I make you run on the page. Now, some might see that as a parlor trick, but my job, the job of literature, is to tell you a story. And it's also my job to use all the tools that I have and use them as well as I can. If I can use the page as a canvas as well as a page, then perhaps I can elicit more feeling from you.
Som sagt, Joe är en av världens ledande experter på The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow är en bok som Lovecraft gillade och lånade ifrån. The King in Yellow är svår att definiera. Det är alltså en pjäs som likt Lovecrafts egen fiktiva bok Necronomicon driver läsaren till vansinne. Lovecraft hade inte läst The King in Yellow när han hittade på Necronomicon, men senare, när han skrev den korta texten The History of the Necronomicon, så lade han skämtsamt till att Chambers hade inspirerats av Necronomicon när han sedan skrev sin fiktiva bok The King in Yellow. Anledningen till att den är svår att berätta om och sammanfatta är för att The King in Yellow är uppbyggd av 10 korta historier och bara 4 av dem som jag minns är kopplade till The King in Yellow-mytologin. De utspelar sig i mitten av 1920-talet, vilket alltså är i framtiden eftersom boken skrevs på 1890-talet. De 2 intressanta historierna av de här 10 då, det är The Repairer of Reputations och den andra är The Yellow Sign. Dessa historier är också svåra att sammanfatta, så därför hintar jag om att historien The Yellow Sign handlar om en likvagnskusk, så spöklik att han beskrivs som en likmask. Han hemsöker en konstnär och hans modell, och efter att de har läst den förbannade pjäsen The King in Yellow anländer han till deras bostad som en sorts lieman och tar dem med sig. Det låter ju inte så fantastiskt när man berättar om det så här, men The Yellow Sign är faktiskt, i alla fall bitvis, riktigt obehaglig och spännande. Det ska tilläggas att vad som exakt händer och varför är svårt att vara säker på, för samtliga berättare i historien är alltså inte pålitliga. Unreliable narrators som det kallas på engelska. Det är alltså för att vi förstår att de är sinnessjuka när de återberättar sina historier för oss. Den fördömda pjäsen The King in Yellow får vi bara bitvis delar och namn på ur historiens gång. För att som sägnen säger, att läsa hela pjäsen skulle innebära att man blir sinnessjuk. Så vad vet vi om pjäsen? Pjäsen utspelar sig i en fiktiv värld i staden Ythil, någon gång någonstans där den kungliga familjen får höra med mystisk främling som bär en slät mask och det skräckinjagande tecknet, The Yellow Sign. Samtidigt som en mystisk stad uppenbarar sig tvärs över sjön. Historien innehåller karaktärerna drottningen, Alar, Dale, Casilda, Aldones och Camilla. När det visar sig att den släta masken inte är en mask utan är främlingens verkliga ansikte, torterar drottningen honom för information tills han dör. Staden på andra sidan sjön försvinner då, och den mystiska varelsen, The King in Yellow, uppenbarar sig och deklarerar att Ythil inte längre existerar. Nu finns bara Carcosa vid sjöns rand. Samtliga karaktärer förlorar då förståndet. Så, nu till pjäsen. Ur akt 1, scen 2, kommer den numera kända delen Casilda's Song, som citeras i flera sammanhang. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies, but stranger still is lost Carcosa. Så, vad är nu Carcosa? Carcosa är en fiktiv stad, ursprungligen från författaren Ambrose Bierce historia An Inhabitant of Carcosa, som sedan Robert Chambers och senare Lovecraft lånade ifrån och använde i sina egna historier. Nu kan man undra vad den här grejen med temat gult är, The King in Yellow. Alltså 1890-talet var alltså känt som the Yellow 90s. Bland annat så fanns det en typ av journalistik som kallades Yellow Journalism. Och det var den tidens skrämseljournalistik om katastrofer och mord för att sälja tidningar. Sedan så finns det sedan urminnes tider tillbaka en färg inom oljemåleriet som heter King's Yellow och är gjord på mineral som heter orphan, som är gul, och eftersom det är en arsenikmalm så var den väldigt populär i detektivromaner som ett gift. Och kanske just därför senare i kioskdeckarna, alltså att kioskdeckarna de var ju oftast gula till omslaget, som till exempel Giallo-romanerna i Italien. Sedan så är ju gult en signalfärg som även användes i PR-sammanhang för att få något att sticka ut. Svårt att veta om det var hönan eller ägget som kom först, men färgen gult har i alla fall länge varit synonymt med kunglighet. Så, vem var då författaren Robert Chambers? Han skrev förvisso ett gäng weird fiction-historier som han idag är mest känd för, men på 1800-talet var han väldigt framgångsrik inom en sorts slit- och släng-litteratur som jag tror kallades kaféromantik. Det var alltså någonting som rika kvinnor läste på kaféer. Trots detta är inte mycket känt av Chambers. För på den tiden så var författare inte mediala personligheter på det sättet som till exempel Houdini eller filmstjärnor. Jag hörde dock att hela hans förmögenhet fästades upp av hans son mot slutet av hans liv eller strax innan hans död. When did you first encounter the King in Yellow?
Robert Bloch had set me up for serial killers. The horror writer Robert Bloch, he had written about Jack the Ripper, and of course Norman Bates from Psycho, and he had written about the Marquis de Sade's granddaughter Juliet, who was a serial killer in a Robert Bloch story. So Robert Bloch had got me as a teenager thinking, what's behind those faces we see? What's behind the mask? What's really in someone's mind? And I was 16. I was at a camp, sitting on a lake, moon shining down, reading an old paperback anthology. It had a story by Robert W. Chambers, The King in Yellow. And I started reading this story in the dark, sitting on the porch, and the story just blew my mind. Here we have a painter and his model who have read the play, they've seen the yellow sign, they're mad, and we have a murder. And we have little snippets of the play. And this is kings and queens and princesses. And there's a question about succession to the throne and who's going to take over the dynasty. So we know that in the King in Yellow play, there's this ball that's going to happen, and people are going to unmask when the Yellow King arrives.
So I must ask you, what is it about Chambers, The King in Yellow, that you find so fascinating?
I was just always fascinated by the play. The play doesn't answer any questions. The play, the bits and pieces of the play, and I would say between the 4 short stories that Chambers wrote about the King in Yellow, I doubt we get more than 2.5 pages in bits and pieces from different parts of the play itself. I had read Lovecraft, and I really liked the pseudo-mythology of the Cthulhu mythos. I liked the cosmic horror aspect. When I got to Chambers and the King in Yellow, and to my knowledge, Lovecraft was the first cosmic horror that I recall encountering. When I came to Chambers, here was cosmic horror, but Lovecraft went left and Chambers went right. It was a different strain of cosmic horror. They're mysterious as hell. We get a sense of what's going on in the play, but we don't get enough of it to truly know all the ins and outs. So there's a mystery. And the play is long ago and far away. And it may not be long ago, far away here. It may be another universe. It may be millions of years ago. I liked the characters that Chambers had in the play. I wanted to know more about the characters. We certainly have the issue of masks in the play. In the 4 stories, we have madmen. We have unreliable narrators. Basically, he borrowed from Poe's Masque of Red Death. He borrowed from the 2 Bierce stories, 2 shorts. From the Bierce, he just borrowed names. And then did completely different things with the names. Except, if you read those 2 Bierce shorts, you're going to find some description of leaden clouds pressing down on a dry, gray landscape. So we're already getting, when Chambers goes to Carcosa, this ruined, aged, dried out, decaying place. That element also comes from Bierce. Chambers spent his early adult years in Paris at the Beaux Arts studying painting. And so he was running around with libertines. He was It's obvious when you read The King in Yellow that he was inspired by the symbiotes and the decadents. And of course, it's the yellow 90s when he's writing. And then Chambers, who was going to have this great career as a painter, got the letter from home saying, okay, you went to Paris, you sowed your wild oats, time to come home and act like an adult. He's called home, he's brought home, and he writes In the Quarter, and then he writes the stories that are in the King in Yellow book. This is like Chambers' love letter to Paris, to his youth. So I think that's the other thing that's in the King in Yellow. This, even though he's young and he's just come home, it's that Paris is long ago and far away, becoming distant in his mind.
I've also heard that keeping the mystery is very important to you.
August Derleth comes along and starts codifying Lovecraft. I hate that. When he comes along, he starts codifying Lovecraft. Cthulhu is this, and Nyarlathotep is that, who's related to this, who's the second cousin of that one over there. I don't want that to happen with the King in Yellow. Want to read more King in Yellow stuff? Well, I've edited a season in Carcosa, which is an anthology of King in Yellow stories. And I also edited another anthology of King in Yellow stories called Casilda Songs, which is nominated for a World Fantasy Award this year. And they're all stories written by women. I do a lot of the King in Yellow. Will I ever leave it alone? I don't think so, because it's a great place for unreliable narrators. It's a great place for masks. It's a great place for creepy and eerie and weird and dread and ruin and long ago and far away. I'm a city kid. So you take the King in Yellow and you drop them in noirish settings. I'm good to go. You know, I'm like a loaded gun just waiting for somebody to pull the trigger.
Och nu ska vi avsluta med att Joe läser ett stycke ur en novell som han har skrivit.
This is a story called A Night of Blood and Moon, then Holston Wall. The wheels. Can you hear them, Herr Doctor? Listen. With purpose, the wheels turn slowly, on and on to the next wear, by day, and when needed by night, over slight round tops, and by the wall-thick hedgerows the lumbering bulk of wagons travel. Weather and time, faded reds and blues and yellows dimly proclaiming M. Night's traveling theater of marvels. Mere feet from the little-traveled road, a wolf had left the small bones of a rabbit, and hours before the loner's repast, a murder of crows had swiftly passed over the brittle grasses tanned by a long, hot summer. Into a silent field of eager weeds and stunted saplings, never to become mighty boles, came, at the edge of nightfall, a carnival. The only song from the train in single file, bearing the flamboyant phantasmagoria, was an ever-grinding moan and sigh of the wheels. The caravan came to rest as if it had sailed over the mountains of the great beyond, to the shores of tomorrow, and was awaiting admittance. Fires were lit, and the weathered wagons positioned. In the twilight, the rain-bled reds and gray-high grays and death-pale yellows looked like weary elephants come home to die after their forced march. In a havoc of rushing sounds, hairy, muscular men with scars and sweeping mustaches, and slinky ladies, once full of promises for the strutting young dandies with bulging pockets, began to construct the fantastic from the threadbare canvases and twisted poles. The fun asylum bloomed in the moonlight. Uneven lines and torn folds revealed grotesquely distorted faces hidden in the deteriorating stripes, while colors of every color beckoned, "Pick me," and behind flaps, in the unlit areas, treasures and wonders for simple minds and small eyes waited. Some of the exhibits waiting were real. 2 majestic white stallions, 1 lion, 1 bear, 1 elephant, and snakes, pythons and asps and cobras. And among the bright tents and fluttering flags, each seeker, compelled, overwhelmed, would find a wolf boy and a sea-green mermaid with icy blue eyes. They'd find a tall man and a short, fat woman, Madame Zala with her old world accent and crystal ball. They might find a professional pickpocket, and they'd find a hypnotist. Games of chance and feats of strength, tricks and treats, rides that whirled, clownish jokes and pamphlets, and snake oils, all were soon to be offered. There were whimsical costumes and hungry dogs running, and glimpses at strange relics and exaggerated dramas. Illusions come to life as the pump organ played. And in a wagon behind the torchlight and all the other wagons was a jaded practitioner of an ancient carnal art. All would be bright or ominous for the silver coins of the curious. By noon tomorrow the siege would begin. The ringmaster walked in the strong moonlight, no clouds, no threat of rain. Low in harmony with the warm southerly breeze, he whispered, "Step right up, my friends, step right up for thrills or shocks." He could hear the youth's ahs and burning coins jingling. He smiled. Tomorrow and tomorrow night and the night after. In the sleeping town beyond the hill, children besotted little Moss, Conrad and Carl, Floria and Anna, and 100 others, fitful in their small beds, dreamed of the gaudy performances the new morning would bring. The world outside their dusty village was but a dream away. Stars chilled by the black canvas of the heavens did not move above the earth. But fireflies, like warm decorations of spring poems, were nimble as they moved like hungry fingers in the valley. On the boards of his crudely painted stage he was poised, as still as a statue in an old museum, staring, gazing on the faces of 1,000 ghosts who had stood before him and stared back in amazement. The clawing features of a few hopeful but melancholy acrobats sucked in the siren promise. Dr. Caligari's smile was a hiss, death stern. With a theatrical gesture, he struck his crooked staff 7 times upon the stage and listened to the muted thundercrack echo. There was no fire burning in the braziers set to the left and right of the small stage. No exotic fragrance from foreign towns filling the air with Eastern mystery. That would happen tomorrow, while anxious eyes collected before the unopened curtain, while they waited and whispered. Though he uttered not a word, Dr. Caligari heard his voice boom in the silent tent. With a grand sweep of his gloved hand, he whisked his Mad Hatter top hat from his head and bowed slightly. "Ladies," he smiled, "and gentlemen." His features were weighted by a detached and bitter expression. "Children," another smile, "step right up. Beyond, in the ink of night, lurk spirits. But here," and he pointed to the lightning pinwheel painted at his feet center stage, "in the minds of men, waiting to be transformed by the power of my voice, lie delights and nightmares."
Ja, det var allt för den här gången. Jag heter Henrik Möller, musiken är skriven av Testbild. Hej då.